All right, so one of the questions I get asked most is, how do I get my shots so smooth with the glide cam? So I'm gonna talk about my 4 keys on how to get smooth shots with the glide cam. Number 1 is balancing your glide cam well. Number 2 is using the right lens or your lens choice. Number 3 is it's all about the offhand or your finesse hand as I call it. And number 4 is the way you walk while you're glide camming. So we're gonna go over those 4 right now. The first one is how to balance the glide cam. Now, I've already covered this in the previous video, but as you're shooting throughout the day, things are gonna get knocked off of balance. And so it's important for you to constantly keep up with that and make sure your balance is good, because that's going to affect how smooth your shots are as you're shooting. I'm going to show you a few examples of bad balance and what your shot looks like, so you can get an idea of, oh, if my shot looks like this, it's because my glide cam is balanced poorly because of this reason. So we're going to go over a few of those right now. The first one we're going to do is, if my drop time is too fast, what will the shot look like? So if the drop time is too fast, that means your shaft here is either too long or you have too much weight on the bottom. If you look at my drop time, it's now about half a second when it should be about 2 seconds. So if your glide cam looks like this, rocking back and forth really fast, that means your drop time is too fast. And this is what your shots are going to look like if that is the case. Action. So it's rocking back and forth, up and down, because there's too much sway, because that drop time is just too fast. The second is, we are going to suppose that the drop time is too slow. My drop time, you see, is backwards. It's supposed to fall this way in 2 seconds, and it's falling this way in about 1 second. So this is what your shot's gonna look like if your drop time is too slow or non-existent because it's going backwards. And here we go. It's gonna be trying to tip over and go upside down like this. And so again, I'm having to use my right hand too much, and it's making the video very shaky. All right, so the next example is when the camera is too back heavy. So I'm now twisting this back to make my glide cam very back heavy. See how it looks? Ooh. So now I'm gonna do a shot with my glide cam back heavy so you can see what it looks like. It's leaning up, and so I have to tilt it down with my offhand. And if I just let go, it's just gonna look like that. And I have to force it down with my offhand. And so my right hand is having to do too much. And so it's defeating the purpose of having this gimbal, because my right hand is touching this shaft too much. And we'll talk about your offhand in just a second. So that's the example of it being too back heavy. Now I'm gonna switch this all the way forward and show you what it's like when it's too front heavy. So here we are now glide camming with it too far front heavy. As you can see, it's gonna be leaning straight down like that. And so with my right hand, I'm gonna be forcing it up, and it's not gonna be very smooth because I'm having to use my hand a lot to keep it up. So all 4 of those, front heavy, back heavy, left heavy, right heavy, same problem. You have too much weight, and so your right hand is touching the shaft too much and making the video shaky. But let's move on to number 2. Number 1 is having your glide cam balanced. If you want to learn more about that, go back to the previous video. Number 2 is your lens choice. Now, the wider angle your lens is, the better you're going to be able to get a smooth shot, because you have more in the frame and you have more leeway to make mistakes and to make unsmooth acts with your glide cam. So in a previous video that I'll pop up right here, I teach you about full frame and crop frame and how to decide which lens is best for your camera to be able to get the wide angle look. But this 16mm on a full frame is going to give you the following wide angle look. And I'm going to cut to this shot right now so you can see it. So that was at 16mm on a full frame camera. I'm now going to zoom in to 35mm so you can see what that looks like. And you can see the difference between when I'm using a wide angle, and you can see a lot more, and it's a wider perspective, and you can see a lot of things whooshing by the camera, as compared to 35mm. And now that I've switched to 35, I got to rebalance my camera just a little bit, my glide cam. And here I am glide camming at 35mm. So they're both doable, but you will be able to notice the difference. I'll play them both back right now so you can see the difference between using a wider angle and a not so wide angle. It is possible to glide cam with even up to 70 millimeter and even higher. And I'm actually going to switch out lenses with Tanner right now. All right, so now I'm going to glide cam at 70 millimeter. So I'll cut to this shot of me glide camming on the 70 millimeter. It's still possible to glide cam with one of these, but it is going to be a lot harder. It gives it kind of a cool cinematic look, and there's going to be times when you want to glide cam with a tighter focal length, but it's just a different skill level, and it's going to be harder to do, and it's going to be harder to make it look smooth. So the second key is your lens choice. Like I said, the wider angle, the better, especially if you're a beginner. It's good to have to get those smooth shots. Key number 3 is it's all about the offhand. This is probably the hardest part of glide camming. Glide camming is kind of like riding a bike. It just takes a lot of practice, and you got to trial and error and figure out how to do it. It's just a unique skill that you got to learn with time and practice. So your offhand is not the hand holding the camera, but it's the other hand that's going to be ever so slightly touching this shaft to keep your glide cam steady. Now, if your glide cam is balanced well, it should be pretty steady without you having to touch it at all. But as you're moving, this thing's gonna tilt from one side to another, and all this hand is really doing is it's countering those slight movements. So if you're running and the wind resistance is taking your camera back, your offhand's job is to just barely apply some pressure up front so that it can't sway back with the wind, but that it's just keeping it, touching it just enough. And a lot of times I'm just tapping it, I'm not even holding it, but just barely touching it, just like that, to keep it from swaying with the wind. Or a lot of times people ask me, how do I keep my camera from swaying like this when I'm glide camming? It's all about the offhand. This is your finesse hand. And this is the reason why I'm right-handed, and this is the reason why I use my right hand to finesse and my left hand to hold it up. Because all your left hand has to do, or my left hand in this case, is hold up the glide cam. Doesn't require any skill to do that, just a little bit of strength. Most people's left arms aren't as strong. Well, build up the strength and use your better hand to finesse the glide cam. I would try both and see which one feels the most comfortable for you, but definitely I feel like your more coordinated hand should be over here on this side of the glide cam, finessing it and keeping it steady. All right, so I'm gonna glide cam now. I'm just doing a straight push-in shot, and Tanner's gonna film close up of my hand so you can see just how little I'm actually touching it. And sometimes I won't even be touching it. If the glide cam is on course and is doing what I want it to, then this hand is just there ready to adjust it and touch it, but not until it needs to be adjusted. And I personally like to hold, with my finesse hand, I like it to be closer up to the gimbal. I feel like the lower it is, the less control you have. The smaller movements you make up here, the bigger difference it's gonna make. But up here, when you're close to the gimbal, you can touch it a little bit harder and it's not gonna make as much of a difference. So you have a little bit more leverage and a little bit more movement with your hand without it making any big adjustments on the whole glide cam. So with my hand as close up here as I can get, I'm gonna be barely touching as I move forward. And here we go. So right there, I said, oh, it's actually doing what I want it to. And then just right there, it started tilting back, so I brought my hand back in to keep it from tilting back. So for a while there, as I was filming, the glide cam was doing exactly what I wanted to, and that should happen a lot of time if your glide cam was balanced well. But as I stepped up on this, I kind of gave a little momentum shift up to my glide cam, and it bounced it up a little bit and started leaning up like this. And so I had to bring my hand back in and just calm it down a little bit and just barely nicking it. And you'll see right here, I have my thumb back here, my 4 fingers up here, and I'm just barely touching like this. So 4 fingers up here, 1 back here. I don't always use 4 fingers, sometimes I just use 1 or 2 like that. But the less you can touch it, the better. All this hand is here to do is to correct any movements and sways your glide cam is making on your own that is contradictory to what you want. So let's talk about, that was just a smooth shot. And with smooth shots, like I said, if your glide cam is balanced well, you shouldn't really have to finesse it much. We're gonna do a shot now where I'm gonna be turning the glide cam like this and how to make a smooth turn. So right now I'm just trying to keep Tanner in the middle of my frame. So I'm just barely touching this thing so that I can just slightly turn in the direction I want it to. So if you can see on that close-up, just a slight tap or turn of my finesse hand. So again, this is to me the most important part of glide camming. I can tell you how I do it, but it really comes down to you practicing and getting a feel for it. As much as I could tell you how to ride a bike, until you get on the bike and try it for yourself, you're never gonna be able to learn how to do it. So get out, practice, I mean months and months, and I've been doing this for 4 years now. So the more you do it and the more you practice, the more trial and error, the better you're gonna get. But just figure out, okay, what am I doing wrong? What does my footage look like? And what can I do to improve it? So right now I'm gonna give you an example of me touching the glide cam too much with my offhand and what that's gonna look like. And that's one of the most common mistakes when people first glide cam, is they feel like they have to control everything with this offhand. And so their footage is gonna look like this. They're gonna be walking and they have their hand clamped on the glide cam really hard because they feel like they have to control its every movement. And so if you have your hand really tight on there like that, that's what your footage is gonna look like. If you're not touching it enough, this is what your footage is gonna look like. It's gonna look better, but it's gonna rise up and down and left and right, depending on if there's wind resistance. You're kind of subject to whatever your body's doing. So if you're gonna make a mistake, I'd make a mistake touching the glide cam too little with your offhand over too much. So here's me not touching it at all. I'm gonna try and go super slow so it just stays nice and center in the frame. I'm not touching it at all. It's leaning up just a little. Now it's leaning a little to the left. And so your right hand would come in at those times to help correct. Now I'm reversing and my glide cam just rocked down and now it's rocking back up. So all my hand over here is doing is keeping that glide cam from rocking up and down. So this is now the example of me having my hand there, ready to stop it from going up and down as I come back and forward. I'm just countering that wind resistance with that offhand. So that is key number 3 to getting smooth shots, is knowing how to use your offhand or your finesse hand. Key number 4 to getting smooth shots with your glide cam is the way you walk. Now, your legs are acting as shocks as you glide cam. Because when you glide cam, if you just walk like you normally do, you're gonna get a slight up and down motion that's jaunting your camera. I'm gonna go ahead and film right now what it looks like if you don't care to have any shock and you're just walking and plomping your feet around. I'll cut to this footage right now so you can see what it looks like if I don't care to have any shock in my legs. And I even try and shock my arm as well, because when you walk, your arms kind of sway and do whatever they want. And so pay very close attention to keeping your arm at the same level. Here's an example of me stepping over something and using my arm as an absorbent shock to try and keep my height, my elevation the same. Instead of just rising with it, I'm gonna try and keep this camera level the whole time, regardless of what the level on the ground is. So going back to the way you walk with your legs, it's almost like you're carrying a full cup of water. If you're carrying a full cup of water, you're not gonna be plomping around like this. You're gonna almost tiptoe and try and make every step super smooth. That's the same motion you do when you're glide camming. So watch this as I glide cam. You try and make every step very soft, intentional, and you want to absorb any shock in your knees. My knees will always hurt after a long shoot because I'm squatting the whole time. People call it my pregnant walk because it looks like I'm pregnant, like I'm trying to keep my baby from having to shake around. But that's kind of the point, is you don't want any movement up top of your body. You want it to all be absorbed down here below. So here's an example of the shot. Okay, good. So that is key number 4 to getting a smooth shot, is the way that you walk and the way that you're using your arms to keep that same elevation as well. There is kind of a 5th step, a 5th key to getting smooth shots that I'm not going to talk about here. I'm going to talk in the post-production or editing workflow, which you can go on to. But the 5th key is warp stabilization, which is in Premiere Pro. It's an effect you can apply to your footage, and I use it on almost every clip that I'm trying to get a super smooth look on. I'll apply just a little bit of it to just smooth everything out just a little bit more and give it even that little bit smoother look to that footage. Go on to the editing section if you want to figure out more about how to use warp stabilizer, how to apply that to your footage, and how to get an even smoother shot on top of your already smooth shot. But that warp stabilizer will not work unless you've learned how to apply those first 4 keys to getting a smooth shot.